Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Deku had the Nine-Tails sealed inside him? He became unstoppable. Subscribe if you enjoy the video. And also check the description. So let's begin the story. The notebooks came first. Before the training, before the fox, before any of it, there were the notebooks, 11 of them by his 9th birthday, filled margin to margin with a handwriting so small and precise that his mother once held one up to the window light and asked, gently, if his eyes were hurting him. They weren't. He just had a great deal to say and not very much space in which to say it, and the smallness of the script felt appropriate, somehow, for observations that were never meant for anyone else. Hero analysis for the future, the covers read, each one numbered. A running record of everything Izuku Midoriya had ever noticed about the people he would never become. He was 9 years old and he already understood, with the particular clarity that children develop when the world is consistently unkind to them, that understanding a thing and belonging to it were entirely different categories of experience. He understood heroism, its mechanics, its psychology, the vectors of force that a water-based quirk required to redirect kinetic energy without injuring bystanders, the precise timing window in which a rescue attempt could succeed before structural collapse made it impossible. He could explain, in careful annotated diagrams, why Endeavor's prominence burn was more thermally efficient than it appeared, why Best Genus fiber manipulation had a 3-second blind spot at maximum range, why Empty Lady's size change carried a metabolic cost that subtly degraded her reaction time and extended engagements. He understood all of it. He belonged to none of it. Quirkless, the doctor had said, when Izuku was 4, and the word had settled into the center of him the way cold water settles into the lowest available point, finding every crack, filling every hollow, becoming eventually indistinguishable from the shape it occupied. He had stopped crying about it somewhere around age 7, not because it stopped hurting, but because the hurt had become so structural that grieving it felt like grieving the arrangement of his own bones. You don't mourn the architecture. You just learn to live inside it. He was 9 years old on the day that everything began to move, the real day, the actual day, the one that would only make sense in retrospect. On the outside, it looked like an ordinary Tuesday in October. On the inside, in the territory that Izuku was only just beginning to understand was larger than he thought, something shifted in the dark beneath his sternum, slow and tectonic, like the first groan of a glacier deciding to move. He didn't feel it. Not then. That came later, in the alley after Bakugu. The morning began with miso soup and the particular quality of autumn light that came through the Midoriya kitchen window at 7:45 a.m., yellow and slightly watery, the kind of light that felt like it was apologizing for something. His mother moved between the stove and the counter with the efficient choreography of a woman who had made peace with small spaces, and Izuku sat at the table with notebook 11 open beside his bowl, reviewing a note he made the previous night about Edshot's fold-a-body technique. Primary limitation appears to be cognitive rather than physical, he'd written. The technique requires real-time spatial calculation at speeds that approach the limits of human processing. Wonder if prolonged use causes any cognitive fatigue. Would explain the 3 to 4 hour deployment pattern in documented rescue operations. He read the note twice, added a small question mark beside it, then closed the notebook, and ate his soup in the methodical way he ate most things, which was to say with attention but without particular pleasure, the way someone eats when food is fuel and the engine is always running somewhere slightly too hot. Will you be home for dinner? His mother asked. Yes, he said. And then, because the question deserved more than a single syllable, because she deserved more than a single syllable, I was thinking I'd go to the park after school, work on the hand-strengthening exercises. His mother turned from the stove. She had a face that hid very little. It was one of the things Izuku loved about her, and one of the things that made him careful, always, about what he allowed her to see. She was looking at him now with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to say the things she was thinking. She decided against it. Take your jacket, she said instead. It gets cold by the river. He took his jacket. School moved the way school always moved, a current he was technically inside of but never quite carried by, always a few degrees off from the direction everyone else seemed to be flowing. He sat in the 3rd row, 2nd seat from the window, and took notes that were more detailed than the teacher required and less legible than anyone else could follow. and during the 20-minute break he ate his lunch alone on the northeast stairwell landing because the northeast stairwell had a view of the street below, and he liked to watch people move. He was watching a man with a gravity quirk rearrange the items in his delivery truck, lifting parcels without touching them, stacking them with a casual efficiency that suggested years of intimate familiarity with the precise weight and center of mass of every object, when Bakugo found him. Or rather, when Bakugo decided that Izuku's continued existence in a location Bakugo had not explicitly authorized was a provocation that required response. The distinction mattered, Izuku had learned, even if it didn't change the outcome. Deku, he didn't turn around. He'd learned that too, writing more of your little books. The footsteps behind him were deliberately loud. Katsuki Bakugo had never learned, or had never cared to learn, the art of approaching without announcement. He was a person who entered spaces, who occupied them by force of volume and heat, who left scorch marks in the air simply by passing through it. You know they're never going to make you a hero, right? No matter how many notes you take. Izuku kept his eyes on the delivery man below. 73 kilograms, he estimated, based on the casual handling of the parcels. The quirk's effective radius was approximately. Are you listening to me? He was always listening. That was the problem. He was constitutionally incapable of not listening, not cataloging, not filing away. He listened to Bakugo the way he listened to everything, with the full, precise, somewhat exhausting attention of a mind that never fully turned off. And what he heard, beneath the rage, beneath the casual cruelty, beneath the bright particular confidence of a boy who had never been told he was anything other than extraordinary, was something that might, in different architecture, have been fear. He didn't say that. He never said that. I'm listening, he said. The shove came first, quick and contemptuous, a palm between the shoulder blades that was more dismissal than violence. He caught himself on the railing. Below him, the delivery man lifted a particularly large parcel and tilted his head, calculating. Then listen to this, Bakugo said, and his voice had shifted into the register that Izuku associated with incoming escalation. Quieter, actually, which was always the tell, the way the air pressure drops before a storm. You're going to stop coming to UA's open sessions. You're going to stop writing those analysis pieces and posting them on the forums. And you're going to stop. A pause, loaded, looking at me like that. Izuku turned around then, because like that was interesting. Like what? Bakugo's eyes were red ember and bright with something that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite something else. His hands were at his sides, small sparks flickering at his palms, a nervous habit Izuku had documented in Notebook 3. Explosive energy discharge appears to correlate with emotional dysregulation, not always intentional. Possible sympathetic response to adrenaline. Like you're waiting, Bakugo said. Like you know something. The silence between them lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Bakugo reached out and took Notebook 11 from Izuku's hands with the particular ease of someone who had never encountered a possession he couldn't simply take. And he looked at it once, just once, the cover, and dropped it over the railing. Izuku watched it fall. It turned once in the air, the cover splaying open, pages fanning briefly into something that looked almost like wings, and then it hit the street below and lay still. The delivery man looked at it. Looked up. Looked away with the careful deliberateness of someone choosing not to become involved. You can try again, Bakugo said, already turning away, already done with the conversation in the manner of someone who had never considered that the other person might have anything left to say. After you get a quirk, he left. Izuku stood at the railing for a moment longer, his hands very still on the metal bar, his face doing the thing it did sometimes, the complete absence of expression that wasn't blankness but rather the opposite of blankness. A surface held so carefully flat that everything underneath it had nowhere to go. He went downstairs and retrieved the notebook. 3 pages had torn loose. He folded them carefully, and put them in his jacket pocket. He walked to his next class. He sat in the 3rd row, 2nd seat from the window, and he opened a fresh page and he started to write. His hands, he noticed, were not shaking. That was new. The park by the river was half empty at 4 in the afternoon. The way it always was on weekdays when the cold had begun its slow institutional advance through the city. A few older women walked small dogs along the path. 2 children on the climbing frame argued with the passionate specificity of people for whom the precise ownership of a particular run was a matter of genuine cosmic importance. A man slept on the bench nearest the water with his coat over his face. Izuku found his usual spot, a flat section of grass behind the equipment shed, far enough from the path that he wasn't visible from it, close enough to the river that the ambient noise of moving water served as a kind of privacy. And he sat down, and he opened his jacket pocket, and he looked at the 3 folded pages from Notebook 11. One of them had dirt on it. He smoothed it against his knee. He didn't cry. He made a point of noting this, the same way he noted everything, with precision, without excessive editorializing. He was 9 years old and he had stopped crying about most things, and the things he still cried about he cried about privately, in the dark of his bedroom after his mother had gone to sleep, with his face in the pillow so the sound didn't travel. That was the arrangement he had arrived at. It was workable. He sat with the folded pages and the cold air and the sound of the river, and he began the hand-strengthening exercises: grip, hold, release, grip, hold, release, using a pair of spring-loaded rings he'd made from materials sourced at the hardware store, because commercial versions were expensive and his mother worked very hard for money that was already stretched in too many directions. He worked through 3 sets, rested, worked through 3 more, rested. He was on the 2nd set of the 3rd rotation when it happened. It was not dramatic. He would think about this later, many times, in the reconstructive way of someone trying to find the precise moment that a before became an after. And what he would always return to was the absence of drama. No flash of light. No thunderclap. No vision or voice or divine intervention. Just a warmth, sudden and unexpected, that settled into the center of his chest as if it had always been there, and was only now choosing to make itself known. He stopped. His hands closed around the grip rings. He held. The warmth was wrong, was the first thing he thought, and then he revised it, because wrong was the wrong word. It wasn't wrong, it was simply other, a quality that didn't belong to anything he knew how to name, like discovering a room in a house you've lived in your whole life, a room you somehow never noticed, and standing in the doorway and realizing from the arrangement of dust that someone has been here the entire time. He sat very still with it. This was his primary response to most things, stillness, not passivity. He'd been told all his life that he was passive, that passivity was his fundamental failing, and he'd eventually come to understand that what people were actually responding to was his quietness, his tendency to receive rather than broadcast, and that the 2 things were not the same. Passivity was the absence of response. Stillness was the presence of attention. He was very, very attentive now. The warmth settled. Held. He breathed. The river moved. One of the children on the climbing frame shrieked with the sudden pure abandon of a child who has just achieved a great victory and wishes the world to witness it, and then the warmth receded. Withdrew. As if whatever had briefly expanded had folded itself back into the deep dark interior of wherever it had come from, quiet again, nearly undetectable. Only the slight elevated temperature in his sternum remaining to suggest it had been there at all. He sat for a long time after that. The sky moved from the particular cold blue of late afternoon into the first gray gold of approaching evening, and the women with their dogs went home, and the children were collected by a parent who moved with the slightly frantic energy of someone chronically late, and the man on the bench turned over and replaced his coat over his face with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was a well-rehearsed arrangement. Izuku sat. He held, in his mind, the sensation of that warmth. He catalogued it with the same careful attention he gave to everything he didn't understand, noting its temperature, hotter than blood, cooler than fever, its duration, approximately 11 seconds, its location, sternum, spreading slightly toward the ribcage, not reaching the extremities, its emotional quality, which was the interesting part, the genuinely interesting part, because it hadn't felt dangerous. It had felt old, vast and exhausted in the way that only things which have been alive for a very long time become exhausted. He rode his bicycle home. He ate dinner with his mother. He told her about the hand exercises and did not tell her about Bakugo or the notebook or the warmth in his chest, not because he was hiding things from her but because none of it had yet resolved into the kind of language he knew how to speak to her. He helped with the dishes. He sat at his desk. He opened Notebook 11 to the first undamaged page and wrote, in his small precise handwriting, October 14th, 4:23 p.m., approximately. Chest warmth. duration approximate 11s. Possible explanations: cardiac event, unlikely, no other symptoms, anxiety response, possible, unusual quality, something else. He stared at something else for a long time. He added, did not feel like fear. Did not feel like illness. Felt like presence. He capped the pen. He got ready for bed. He had been dreaming for years without knowing they were significant. The kind of dreams that slip away in the first 10 seconds of waking, leaving only a residue. An emotional weather pattern that colored the morning without being traceable to any specific image. He dreamed of water often. He dreamed of the color red. He dreamed, sometimes, of a sound that was less a sound than a vibration. Something felt in the bones rather than heard with the ears. A frequency so low it registered as physical pressure. He'd assumed this was normal. He hadn't had a reference point for otherwise. The dream on the night of October 14th was different. He was in a corridor. This was the first new thing. The specificity of the architecture. The way the details arrived with the coherent logic of waking reality rather than the associative drift of ordinary dreaming. The corridor was long and institutional, the kind of hallway that exists in places built for function rather than comfort. Hospitals, perhaps, or government facilities, or the deep administrative interior of very large buildings. The ceiling was high. The walls were bare concrete, textured in the way of poured-form construction. The floor was covered in a thin film of still water that reflected the lights above, bare fluorescent tubes and wire cages, the kind that hum audibly. He was standing in it, and he understood, with the immediate total body comprehension of dream logic, that he had been standing in this corridor for a very long time without knowing it, that this was not a new place. That he had simply, until now, not been able to see it. He walked. The water didn't ripple as it should have under his feet. It moved in slow, heavy rings, like the surface of something much deeper than it appeared, like the water was only the topmost membrane of something that extended very far down. He noted this. He followed it. The corridor turned. He followed it. Turned again. He followed, and then he saw it, a door. Red, not painted, not stained, but inherently red in the way that some things in dreams are simply their own color all the way through, as if the redness were structural rather than cosmetic. It was large. Larger than a standard door, large enough that the proportions sat slightly wrong against the rest of the corridor, as if the door existed at a different scale, as if it belonged to a different architecture entirely. There were markings on it. He couldn't read them, not quite, the way you sometimes cannot read in dreams no matter how clearly you see, but they had a quality that was not decorative. They felt functional, important. Like the kind of notation you find on things that are meant to be kept from moving. He stood in front of it and looked at it and felt, in his chest, the warmth. And then, from the other side of the door, something breathed. Not in out, not the rhythm of ordinary respiration, a single exhale, long and deep and carrying within it a quality of scale that made the air in the corridor thicker, made the water shiver in its slow rings outward from the point where Izuku stood, made the fluorescent lights flicker once and hold. He stood very still. On the other side of the red door, in whatever space existed there, something that had been still for a very long time shifted its weight. He woke up. The clock read 3:47 a.m. His room was dark and cold, the window slightly open the way he always left it, the curtain moving in the river direction breeze. His chest felt different. Not the warmth of the park, not the dream warmth of the corridor, but the aftermath of both. The specific temperature of a place where a fire has been and gone, banked embers rather than flame. He lay on his back and looked at the ceiling and breathed. Then he looked at his pillow. The pillowcase, cream-colored cotton, a small pattern of green that his mother had chosen because it was his favorite color, was scorched along one edge. Not burned through, not damaged in any structural sense, but scorched, a faint brown-black discoloration, the shadow of heat applied from below, from the direction of his head. He sat up slowly and looked at it for a long time. He picked it up. Held it. Turned it over in his hands, studying the pattern of the discoloration. It was worst at the center and faded outward in a gradient that was almost perfectly circular, almost perfectly symmetrical, as if the heat source had been stationary and the damage had propagated outward from a single fixed point, as if the heat had come from him. He put the pillow down. He lay back. He stared at the ceiling again, at the crack in the plaster near the light fitting that he'd been meaning to mention to his mother for 3 weeks and kept forgetting, at the way the streetlight through the curtain made a moving leaf shadow that shifted and reformed with every breath of wind. His chest was warm, he told no one. November arrived with rain. The world contracted, the way the world does in autumn, streets emptying earlier, windows fogging, the city pulling itself inward. Izuku moved through it with his jacket zipped, and his notebook dry under his arm and his eyes moving over everything with the unrelenting attention that had long since ceased to feel like a choice and now simply felt like the nature of his particular consciousness. Always processing, always observing, always taking in more than it was clear what to do with. He catalogued 3 more incidents by the end of the month. The first, he was running the steps of the hill park, an exercise routine he developed after reading 4 separate accounts of hero candidates who had improved their cardiovascular capacity through incline work, when he felt, at the 11th repetition, a sudden and complete absence of the burning in his thighs and lungs that had accompanied the first 10. Not the managed absence of trained endurance, not the result of finding a rhythm, an actual absence, as if someone had simply turned off the relevant signal. He ran 4 more repetitions before it returned. He sat down in the rain and wrote about it, rain spotting the page. The second, he was in the school library during lunch, reading a collection of essays on Quirk theory, when the boy at the table across from him, a third-year named Hideki who had a minor wind manipulation quirk he used mostly to keep his hair perfectly arranged, bumped his elbow against the shelf and sent a stack of books cascading toward the floor. Izuku caught all 7 of them, one-handed. Before he had consciously registered the movement, before the decision had arrived from whatever part of the brain issued such decisions, his hand was simply there, and the books were simply in it, and Hideki was staring at him with his mouth slightly open, and Izuku said sorry, and put the books back on the shelf and returned to his essay, and did not look up again. He wrote about this too. He wrote, reaction time anomalous. Not voluntary. What is responding? The third, he was at the river, evening, in the cold, doing the grip exercises, when a stray cat, an enormous, battle-scarred orange tom that lived in the park and regarded all humans with the contempt of a creature that had once briefly considered friendship and found it wanting, came and sat beside him. Not near him, beside him, with intention, in the specific way of a cat that has made a decision. It sat and looked at him, and he looked back. And after a moment it tucked its paws beneath its chest and closed its eyes and went to sleep against his knee with the utter confidence of an animal that has assessed the situation and found it safe. He didn't move for 40 minutes so as not to disturb it. He wrote about this in a different way than the others, less clinical, more wondering. Animals, he noted, respond to something they can sense that I can't. Or that I can, but differently. Note for further observation. He was building something in the notebooks, a portrait assembled from evidence rather than assertion, a case made from the accumulation of small facts rather than the declaration of large ones. He had not yet put a name to what he was building the portrait of. He was not sure he was ready for that name. He suspected, with the intuition of someone who had spent his entire life sitting very still with difficult realities, that the name would change things irrevocably, and that irrevocability demanded a certain preparation. So he gathered evidence. And he waited. And the warmth in his chest banked and breathed and very occasionally, in the deepest part of the night, cast its faint light against the inside of his ribs like embers in a hearth that no one had yet thought to tend. The second visit to the Red Door happened on a Wednesday in late November. He found the corridor more easily this time. There was a quality to the approach, in the architecture of the dream, that felt like familiarity, like a route the body remembers even when the mind has mislaid it. He didn't need to search. He walked through a threshold that might have been sleep and he was simply there, in the still water and the fluorescent light, in the specific quality of air that existed in this place, which was not stale, precisely, but dense, layered, as if it contained more history per cubic meter than the waking world's air was typically required to carry. He walked to the door. He stood in front of it. Something on the other side was already awake. He could feel this. Not through any mechanism he could have articulated in the waking world, not through sound or light or physical sensation, but through the particular quality of awareness that the space behind the door projected. The way a room changes when someone is standing on the other side of a wall, the way silence changes when it is being held, rather than simply existing. He put his hand flat against the red surface. The warmth came immediately, more intense than anything he'd felt in the waking incidents. Not painful but enormous. A heat that seemed to come from the door's other side and answer something in his palm. The way two identical frequencies reinforce each other. He felt it move up his arm, into his shoulder, spreading through the network of his body like ink dropped in water. Slower than blood, more inevitable, finding every channel. He kept his hand there. The breathing on the other side changed. Grew more deliberate. Grew aware. He didn't speak first. This was characteristic. He waited, with his hand on the door and the warmth moving through him, and he was not afraid. He noted this with the same careful precision with which he noted everything. A footnote to the moment. He was not afraid, which was interesting, because he had grown up being told that he was afraid of everything, and the accusation had always contained enough truth to land. He was cautious. He was attentive. He was very good at recognizing danger, but standing at this door with this heat moving through his hand, what he felt was not fear. What he felt was closer to recognition. The way you feel, sometimes, on the edge of remembering something important. Then a voice came through the door, and voice was approximation, because it was less auditory than gravitational, less heard than felt. A pressure in the air and the water and the particular architecture of this dreamed space. Old. Unspeakably, incomprehensibly old, the way that certain objects carry the weight of their history as a physical quality. The way standing in a very old building sometimes feels like standing under a great and invisible pressure. It said, and the words were in a language Izuku had never learned and understood perfectly, the way you sometimes understand things in dreams. You are still here. He kept his hand on the door. He said yes. A silence. Long, and textured, and full of the quality of something reconsidering. You always come back, the voice said. Not a question. I think this is my house, Izuku said, which was not what he'd intended to say, but which arrived in his mouth with the particular weight of something deeply true. Another silence. And then, and this was the thing he would return to, in the waking world, again and again in the weeks that followed, the thing that changed the temperature of every subsequent thought about this place. Something on the other side of the door made a sound that might, if translated through significant interpretive charity, have been called a laugh. Low. Short. Exhausted. But real. Yes, the voice said, eventually. I suppose it is. He woke up at 4:12 a.m. with his chest warm and his pillow unmarked and the cat from the park somehow sitting on his windowsill, which was 3 stories up, watching him with the unreadable calm of a creature that has never been confused about where it belongs. He stared at it. It stared back. Hi, Izuku said. The cat blinked once, slowly, and tucked its paws beneath its chest, and settled. He lay back down. He looked at the ceiling. He felt the warmth in his chest, steadier now than it had ever been, a fixed thing, an established thing, a thing that was choosing, he was almost certain it was choosing, to let itself be felt. He thought, for the first time, in a complete and fully formed sentence, I am not alone in here. The thought was large. It required sitting with rather than resolving. He sat with it the way he sat with most large things, carefully, attentively, without hurrying toward the next thought. The cat slept. The warmth held. Outside, the city moved through its 4 a.m. rhythms, the particular human traffic of the deep hours, the last trains and the first trucks and the people who only exist in the interstitial spaces of ordinary time. The river moved somewhere below his window. The curtain moved in the river direction breeze. Izuku Midoriya lay in the dark of his bedroom with 2 souls in his chest and the beginning of something enormous coiled beneath his sternum. And he was 9 years old and had spent his entire life being told he contained nothing, and he understood, for the first time, what a profound category error that had always been. He was not empty. He had never been empty. He was, in fact, and this was going to take some time to fully reckon with, some considerable time, he could see that already, extremely full. He reached for notebook 11 on his nightstand. He uncapped the pen with the hand that wasn't holding the warmth in mind. He wrote, in the dark, by feel, in his small and careful script, November 28th, 4:12 a.m. Dreams, the corridor again. The red door. Something on the other side. It spoke. I spoke. He paused. Thought. Wrote. I am beginning to think that the warmth is not something that is happening to me. I am beginning to think it is someone. He capped the pen. He put the notebook down. He lay in the dark with his eyes open, feeling the slow and ancient breathing of a thing that was not quite awake and not quite asleep. That was ancient and exhausted and vast, and he was almost certain of this, in the deep body way that bypassed analysis and arrived as simple knowledge, choosing to be gentle, for now. Choosing patience. Choosing the slow approach over the sudden. Why? He thought, into the warm interior of himself, not yet knowing that it could hear him, not yet having the vocabulary for what they were building in the dark, only knowing, with the particular clarity of a child who has spent years observing things more carefully than anyone expected, that something was listening. The warmth shifted. Settled deeper. It didn't answer. But it heard. He was sure of it. He lay in the dark of his ordinary bedroom in his ordinary house in his ordinary city, and he felt, for the first time in his memory, that the too much of him, the excess that had always felt like malfunction, the overwhelming volume of his attention and his caring and his aching need to understand everything, was not a defect. It was a capacity. He didn't know yet what it was a capacity for. He suspected that was going to be a very large answer, the kind that arrived not all at once but in pieces, over time, each piece requiring integration before the next could be received. He was patient. He had always been patient. Everyone had called it passivity, had called it fear, had called it the particular learned smallness of a boy without power in a world built for people who had it. But he knew now, had always perhaps known, somewhere below the waterline of conscious thought, that it wasn't smallness. It was him being full, too full, almost, to move. He closed his eyes. He breathed. The warmth breathed with him, out of sync by a half-beat, the way two people walking together are always slightly off from perfect synchrony, close, but individual, present, but distinct, two souls in one chest. One house with an unexpected second resident who had been there from the beginning, patient in their own vast way, waiting for the person who lived here to finally turn around and notice the light under the door. He had noticed. He slept, and did not dream, and in the morning the cat was gone from the windowsill, and the pillow was unmarked, and the warmth was still there, and Izuku Midoriya made miso soup and packed his notebooks and walked to school in the autumn cold, and he was 9 years old and the world had not changed at all, and nothing about him that was visible had changed. And somewhere below his sternum the most ancient thing he would ever meet had gone back to sleep in its own good time, secure now in the knowledge that when it woke again the boy would be there. The boy was always there. That, the warmth seemed to say, in the wordless register of things communicated below the threshold of language, in the territory of pure knowing. That is exactly the problem, and the beginning of everything else. He did not speak in words at first. He spoke in heat. In the sudden absence of fear. In the way Izuku's hands stopped shaking during the moments that had always, reliably, made them shake, the hallway confrontations, the lunch period silences, the particular quality of being looked through by someone who had decided, a long time ago, that you contained nothing worth looking at. These were the moments that had historically produced in Izuku's body a very specific physiological response. The elevated pulse, the cold flush from sternum to fingertips. The slight tremor in the dominant hand that he'd learned to manage by gripping his pencil harder, writing smaller, making his body perform a stillness his nervous system wasn't providing. And then, beginning in late November, almost exactly a week after the dream with the voice and the door, the shaking simply stopped. Not gradually, not as the result of any deliberate practice. One day it was there. The next time it should have appeared, it wasn't. As if the relevant signal had been routed through new infrastructure. As if something in the deep architecture of him had quietly, without consultation, been upgraded. He noted this. He noted everything. He added it to the growing column of evidence in the private section of Notebook 11 that he'd begun keeping in a cipher of his own devising. Not because he seriously expected anyone to find the notebook, but because the act of encoding the information felt appropriate to its nature. Some things demanded a certain formality of concealment. Some things were simply not ready to exist in plain language. Tremor response. Absent, he wrote, in his careful small cipher. Occasions when previously reliable, for in past week. On each occasion, warmth present. Correlation coefficient, 1.0. Interpret accordingly. He interpreted accordingly, which is to say he sat with the interpretation for 3 days without committing to it, because commitment required certainty and certainty required more evidence, and patience had always been, whatever else could be said about Izuku Midoriya, his most reliable resource. He was still sitting with it when December arrived with its particular species of cold, not the damp, apologetic cold of November, but a sharp, declarative cold that came off the river in the mornings and found every gap in winter clothing with the efficiency of something that had been doing this for a long time and had no interest in being subtle about it. He was sitting with it, in fact, on the morning of December 3rd, on the roof of the community center where he sometimes did his grip exercises because the roof was flat and private and had a view that encompassed the river, the park, 3 blocks of residential buildings, and a slice of the skyline where, on clear days, you could see the top of the old factory chimney that had been converted into a Hero Agency observation tower, when the voice arrived, not in the dream, in the waking world, in the real and ordinary morning, with the cold and the river smell and the grip rings in his hands. It was not a voice that arrived through the ears. The closest analogy he would find, months later, after considerable reflection, was the feeling of a word arriving in your mind that you have been trying to remember for a long time, not heard, not read, but surfaced, called up from somewhere interior, carrying with it the specific texture of the place it had been kept. Not his thought. He was certain it was not his thought, because his thoughts had a particular quality of voice, his mother's cadence, mostly, overlaid with the flat analytical register he'd developed for his notebooks, and this was not that. This was something entirely other. Older. Heavier. A voice that had the weight of something which had been speaking for a very long time and had grown tired of the sound of its own centuries. You are wasting my time by crying. He wasn't crying. He hadn't been crying. He'd been doing grip exercises in the cold December morning, 3rd set, 7th repetition, his breath making brief white flags against the air, his mind occupying the quiet analytical register it found when the body was sufficiently engaged, running a low-level review of a recent pro-hero rescue operation he'd found documented in a trade publication, thinking about reach-to-weight ratios, thinking about the weather, not particularly thinking about anything, not crying. He sat very still with the voice in the same way he'd learned to sit with the warmth, receiving it without either grasping after it or pushing it away. The practiced stillness of someone who had learned that new and important things needed room to settle before they could be examined properly. Then, into the silence that followed, a silence that had a different texture now, no longer the simple absence of sound but the presence of something withheld, something on the threshold of saying more, he said, aloud, to the cold morning air and the grip rings in his hands and whatever else was listening. I wasn't crying. A pause. Long enough that he began to wonder if he'd imagined it. Long enough that the cold worked its way through 2 layers of jacket, and reminded him that he was sitting on a rooftop in December talking to himself, which was, objectively, a concerning development. And then, no, not this moment. I meant in general. As a practice. As a way of spending time. The quality of the voice, he was working out as quickly as he could work things out, which was quickly. The quality of the voice was not contempt, exactly, though contempt was the surface finish. It was something more layered than contempt. It was the tone of something that had seen a great deal and had arrived, through long experience, at a position regarding human feeling that was not unkindness but rather a very specific and well-earned impatience with feeling deployed without purpose. The way a very old doctor might speak to someone sitting in a waiting room crying about a splinter. Not cruel. Just, calibrated to a much larger scale. Izuku thought about this. He turned it over in his mind the way he turned everything over, thoroughly, from multiple angles, checking the weight of it, noting the places where it didn't sit quite right. I don't cry as a practice, he said finally. I cry when something warrants it. I've been working on the definition of warrants. Another pause. This one had a different quality, not the absence of response but the presence of reconsideration. That, the voice said, is a more sophisticated position than I expected. What were you expecting? Less, it said, simply, and did not elaborate, and something in the simplicity of the answer, the honest bareness of it, the absence of any softening, landed in Izuku's chest with a weight that was not quite hurt, and not quite something else. He put the grip rings down. He looked out at the river. He said, Are you going to tell me what you are? The warmth in his chest expanded slightly, not the aggressive surge of the dream encounters, but something more conversational, a shift in temperature that felt, he was beginning to realize, the way expressions feel on a face you are learning to read. This one was, amused perhaps. Distantly, "No," said the voice. "Not yet. You haven't earned it." "How do I earn it?" "By asking better questions." He considered this. He considered the specific criteria implied by better, the epistemological standards of a voice that had existed long enough to develop strong opinions about the quality of inquiry. He considered the red door and the still water and the exhale that had come through the door like weather, like a force of nature practicing restraint. He said, "How long have you been in here?" A silence. "Very long this time." The quality of it was different from the others. This silence was not withheld but genuinely occupied, as if the question had required going somewhere interior, consulting something, checking a measurement that hadn't been taken recently. "Longer than you have been," it said, at last. "That's not possible." "I've been here since I was born." "Yes," the voice agreed, with a patience that suggested it had expected this exact objection. "And I have been here since before that." He went home and sat with it for 4 days. This was his process with large things. The sitting, the turning over, the patient accretion of understanding that arrived in layers rather than all at once, each layer requiring the previous one to fully settle before it could be received. He was, by training and by disposition and by the particular architecture of a life spent receiving information that required careful management, not a person who rushed the integration of new realities. He went to school. He ate his meals. He did his exercises. He maintained, with the practiced ease of long habit, the surface performance of an ordinary boy living an ordinary life, present in body, attentive in the expected ways, producing the expected responses to the expected stimuli, while in the deeper register of himself something enormous was slowly, carefully, being rearranged. The voice did not speak again during those 4 days. But it was there. He could feel it with a new resolution now, the way you begin to hear a sound once it's been identified, the way it sharpens out of background noise into specificity the moment you have a name for it. The warmth was always there, had always been there, and now it was also a presence, a distinct and separate consciousness whose very distinctness from his own he could feel in the way he felt the edges of things, the borders between self and not self, the place where he ended and something else began. It was strange, the ending. He had not known, before, that he had one. He had always felt, boundaryless was perhaps the word, though he would not have used it then, not at 9 years old with his limited vocabulary for interior experience. He had always felt that there was too much of him, and no wall around it, that he leaked at the edges, that his feelings and his attention and his terrible surplus of caring moved outward without containment into a world that consistently had no room for them. He had assumed this was the essential problem of being Izuku Midoriya. That he was simply, structurally, too much and not enough at the same time. Now he was beginning to wonder if what he'd felt as his own excess had been, in part, something else. Something borrowed. Something that moved in him like a weather system moves in a valley, filling the available space with a climate that was not quite native. "You are working yourself in circles," the voice said, on the evening of the 4th day. He was at his desk, ostensibly reviewing a rescue operation case study, actually staring at the wall. "How do you know what I'm thinking?" "I don't," it said. "I know what you feel. It's different." A pause. "Right now you feel like a wheel spinning without traction. Round and round, going nowhere. It has a particular quality." "A quality you recognize?" "I have been present in a great number of minds," the voice said, and there was something in the phrasing, present in, not part of, not belonging to, that Izuku filed carefully, that felt like information. The particular sensation of a mind working hard to understand something it isn't quite ready to understand yet is very recognizable. "I have felt it from the inside more times than I can count." Izuku turned this over. "You've been in other people, not a question." The voice treated it accordingly, not answering it directly, simply letting it sit in the space between them, which was not a physical space but felt, increasingly, like one, a shared interior geography. A place they were both learning the coordinates of. "I have questions," Izuku said. "I know. Will you answer them?" The warmth shifted in his chest, that conversational movement he was learning to read, learning to anticipate. This particular shift was the one he was beginning to associate with consideration, with something being weighed. Some of them, the voice said. When the questions are good enough, you keep saying that. What makes a question good enough? When it is honest, the voice said, with an immediacy that suggested this was not something that required thought. When it is not asking for reassurance dressed as inquiry. When it has at its center something the asker actually wants to know rather than something they want confirmed. Izuku thought about this for a long time. He turned over the questions he'd been carrying, the cosmological ones, the what are you and the why me and the what does this mean, and he examined them with the honesty the voice demanded, looking for what was actually at their center. What he actually needed to know, what was real, he found, at the center, not a cosmological question at all. Are you, he started, and stopped, and started again. Are you going to hurt me? The silence that came was the longest yet, long enough that the building settled around him in its nightly way, long enough that the sounds from the kitchen where his mother was moving through her before-bed routine washed into the room and back out again, long enough that he thought the voice had retreated back into its interior silence, the profound closed-in stillness that he associated with the red door, and whatever lived behind it. Then no, one word. But the quality of it was substantial. Weighted in the specific way of things that have been meant carefully, that carry the particular density of a commitment, made by something that does not make them often. Not a reassurance. Not performed comfort. Just the word, set down like a stone. Have you? He paused again, checking himself, checking for honesty, finding it. Have you heard others? People like me? Before. A much longer silence this time. Yes, the voice said finally. Not because I wanted to, he breathed. He sat with this the way he sat with difficult facts, not pushing away, not catastrophizing, just receiving. Adding it to the picture. Adjusting the calibration. What happened to them? That, the voice said quietly, is a very good question, and it did not answer it. Not that night. But the not answering felt different from the usual withholding. It felt like the silence of something that was genuinely grappling with how to say a true thing truly, rather than the silence of something that had simply decided not to speak. It felt, in some way he couldn't fully articulate, like the beginning of honesty. He closed his notebooks. He got ready for bed. He lay in the dark with the warmth in his chest and the new knowledge of the presence, and the beginning of a relationship that had no name yet, no precedent in his experience. No template in any of the 11 notebooks, no equivalent in the hero analysis literature he had spent 5 years consuming with the fervor of someone who studied the world they were excluded from. Nothing had prepared him for this. He found, to his own surprise, that he did not mind. The real conversations began in December's second week, after the snow arrived and the world went quiet under it. They happened in that specific liminal space between sleep and waking. Not the full dreamed architecture of the corridor with its still water and red door, but something more immediate than that, a state that felt like lying at the very surface of sleep with the room still dimly visible around him, and the voice present in a way that felt less mediated, less symbolic. More simply there. He asked questions. The voice answered some of them. He asked others. It answered differently, not lying. He was becoming certain it was constitutionally incapable of lying in any satisfying way, but choosing how much truth to offer and in what order. It was teaching him, he slowly understood, to ask the right questions before it offered the right answers. It was building, with characteristic patience, the capacity to receive what it eventually intended to give. Tell me about chakra, he said, one night. He'd found the word in an obscure academic text on pre-Quirk energy theory, a fringe field, largely discredited, that posited the existence of an interior biological energy system predating Quirks by millennia. The paper had been written in the 1980s and cited no primary sources. He'd read it 3 times. Where did you find that word? The voice said, and its quality was different, less careful, less managed. Something that might, in a different register, have been surprise. Academic paper. 1986. A researcher named Fujimoto who believed Quirks were a modern expression of an ancient energy system. He was dismissed by the field. He paused. Was he wrong? He was approximately 30% correct, the voice said, which is more correct than most. Tell me the other 70%. And it did. Not all at once. The voice Izuku was learning was structurally incapable of delivering information the way Izuku preferred to receive it, which was comprehensively and with full context and in a logical sequence from foundational principles to complex applications. It delivered information the way very old things deliver information, in pieces, in parables, in the presentation of examples from which principles were expected to be derived, with the assumption that the receiver was capable of the inferential work. It was, he thought privately, an infuriating way to teach. He did not say this. He did the inferential work. Chakra was interior. That was the first principle. Not a product of biology in the way that quirks were products of biology, not a mutation or an adaptation, not located in any specific physical structure that could be identified in an X-ray or a DNA test. It was fundamental, closer to the relationship between the mind and the body than to either one separately. A current, the voice said once, and then revised, not a current. A depth. The underlying water table beneath the various rivers and streams of physical function. Everyone has it, the voice said, on an evening when the snow was particularly heavy, and the room felt sealed against the world in the specific way of heavy snowfalls, when the city's sound fell away and there was only the weight of winter pressing down. It is not unique to you. In your world, the emergence of quirks rerouted it. Changed the channels. But it did not create it or eliminate it. People who lacked quirks, he felt, rather than heard the voice pause. Felt the specific texture of a pause that was choosing. People who lack quirks, it continued, have chakra that is, uninterrupted. Undivided. Not split between a native quirk's demands and its own nature. In some of them it simply lies fallow, dormant, having no tradition to move into, no one having taught them its nature. Another pause. In you, it has been supplemented. By you, by my presence. Yes. He thought about the grip exercises. The caught books. The cat. The absent tremor. It's been affecting me. The whole time. Leaking, perhaps. I apologize for that. The apology surprised him so completely that he lost the thread of the conversation for a moment. He had not expected apology from this voice. Had not indexed it as something the voice's character was capable of, and the revision required recalibration. He recalibrated. Leaking how? I am large, the voice said, with a dryness that was becoming familiar, that he was beginning to think of as something very close to self-aware humor. Containing myself fully requires effort. In years past, I was not attempting it very hard. You were young. I was being careful. What changed? The warmth in his chest did something complicated. He was getting better at reading the vocabulary of it, the shifts and pressures and temperatures that served as the voice's nonverbal register, the layer of communication that moved beneath the words. This particular shift was, he searched for the word, reluctant. It had the quality of reluctance, of something being faced rather than offered. The alley, it said. With the boy. With the burning notebook. Izuku was very still. You were watching. I am always watching. I cannot see what you do not see. I cannot hear what you do not hear. But I experience it. I was there. A pause that had the texture of something held with careful hands, something fragile being managed. I have been present in many people who were harmed. In many circumstances of cruelty. I have, over time, developed an opinion about it. What kind of opinion? The kind, the voice said, with quiet and absolute finality, that is not compatible with passivity. He lay with this. He felt, in the warmth, something that was, not anger, not the hot bright reactive thing he'd experienced as anger before, but something that made anger seem like a very small, very local weather event. Something vast and cold at its core beneath the heat. Something ancient enough that it had moved past the phase where it needed to perform itself. You wanted to do something, he said. I wanted to take the building apart, the voice said, with a simplicity that was more alarming than any amount of fury would have been. Stone by stone. Starting with the foundation. But you didn't. You didn't, the voice corrected. And I found I was interested in why. A shift in the warmth, subtle and complex. I have encountered a great many hosts, Izuku Midoriya, and I have watched what cruelty does to them. Most turn towards something. Toward rage, toward despair, toward the particular flatness that comes when feeling becomes too expensive to maintain. You sat in the street and picked up your notebook and went to your next class. I didn't have anywhere else to go. That is not why you went. Certainty in the voice, absolute and unargued. I know what retreat born of hopelessness feels like from the inside. That was not what I felt in you. You went because you had decided, in some way that was not conscious and not chosen but simply fundamental, that you were going to keep going. That whatever happened to the notebook was not the point. That the point was elsewhere, and you had not found it yet, and you were going to keep looking. Izuku was quiet for a long time. The snow was very heavy outside. The room was very still. That makes me sound braver than I am, he said. Bravery, the voice said, is the wrong category. You were not unafraid. I felt you afraid. I felt the shape of what it costs you, every day, to move through a world that has decided what you are before you've had the opportunity to disagree with the assessment. Another pause. What you demonstrated was not the absence of fear. It was fear declining to be the deciding factor. That is something else. It has a different name. What name? A warmth that felt, for the first time, almost gentle. Almost. The gentleness of something enormous attempting, with considerable effort and imperfect results, to be careful. I haven't decided, the voice said. I'm still watching. By January he had developed, through trial and considerable error, something approaching a training methodology. It was not a methodology anyone could have taught him. There were no books on this subject, no documented precedents, no academic papers more useful than Fujimoto's partially correct speculation. What he had was the voice's occasional, oblique guidance and his own considerable capacity for self-directed study, and the experimental instinct of someone who had spent years observing things carefully enough to understand how they worked even when he couldn't participate in them. He began with sensation. The warmth was not undifferentiated. He could feel, when he concentrated, that it had texture, had depth, the way that a body of water that appears still at the surface reveals, when you pay close attention, the evidence of currents beneath. He could feel, when he sat very quietly with his attention directed inward, that there were layers, a warm surface register that was perpetually present, a deeper and much hotter interior that was rarely accessible, and between them a gradient that he could, with effort and concentration, move through. Not access. He was not accessing anything. He was simply becoming more aware of what was there. Learning the geography of an interior country. The voice watched this with what he had come to recognize as its version of approval, which was the absence of commentary. When it had something to say, it said it. When it was satisfied, it said nothing. He had learned to read the quality of its silences the way he read everything, with attention, with patience, with the willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than resolve it prematurely into something that fit better than it was accurate. You are looking in the wrong place, it said one evening, in the middle of a meditation exercise he designed and found wanting, sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor in the particular cold that gathered near the window in January. You are looking at it. You should be looking from it. He thought about this. He shifted, internally, the direction of his attention, not toward the warmth but somehow through it, using it as a vantage point rather than a subject, looking outward from the interior heat rather than regarding it from outside. The world, seen this way, was different, not dramatically. Not with any visual change, not with any of the theatrical signifiers that hero fiction consistently used to indicate the awakening of power, no shifting colors, no visible energy, no dramatic alteration of the physical world. But the quality of his perception shifted in a way that was subtle and total and that he would spend weeks trying to articulate in his notebooks without ever quite finding the right language. Everything felt closer to its own nature. The wood grain of the floorboards had a particular oldness that he could feel rather than see. The cold coming off the window glass was not ambient temperature but a specific quality of contact, a directional thing. His own breathing sounded different from inside this perspective, slower, deeper, more structural, and beneath all of it, vast and deep and breathing in its own register, the presence. The other. He looked at it. He looked from it. And it looked back, and for a moment, one very precise and bordered moment, clean at both edges, they were simply two things in the same space, both aware, both present, neither diminished by the other's existence. Then the moment passed and he was sitting on his floor in January with his legs gone numb, and the feeling that he had briefly and accidentally touched something true. Better, the voice said. Better than what? Better than crying. He laughed. He hadn't expected to, and the sound surprised him. It surprised him enough that he registered it as information, added it to the column of things this voice had produced in him that nothing else had produced, the small and accumulating evidence of something that was becoming, despite every reasonable objection, a relationship, he said, because he was feeling brave, or something the voice had told him had a different name. Why me? Why did you choose this? Why here? He had asked this before. The voice had not answered. He asked it again because the question felt different now, not the desperate need for reassurance of the first weeks, not the lurching uncertainty of someone trying to understand if they were safe. He asked it now from a different place, a steadier one. He asked it honestly, as the voice had taught him to, with genuine wanting to know at its center rather than wanting to be told something that would make the situation feel less strange. The voice was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car moved slowly through the snow on the street below, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling in the way that had always, since he was very small, felt like a kind of visitation, the temporary presence of light in a dark room, gone before you could decide what to do with it. Because you were not afraid of what you didn't understand, the voice said finally. You were only sad about it. He sat with this. He felt it move through him, not the warmth, but the words, which had their own temperature. He felt the accuracy of it, the specific and precise accuracy of being truly seen by something, of having your nature named correctly by a witness who had reason to know. That's enough? He said. To be chosen for? It was enough to make me curious, the voice said. I was already here. I could not leave. But I had been, elsewhere, inside myself, for a long time, the way you withdraw into the part of your mind where they cannot reach you. You know that withdrawal. A pause. Yes? Yes, he said. I was very far inside, the voice said. And then I looked out, and there you were. Sitting in an alley with a burned notebook, taking notes on the texture of the damage. The warmth did something complicated. It seemed significant. To be noticed, he breathed. He felt, for the second time, the specific quality of this voice being honest, the different weight of it, the slight roughness, the absence of management. It was not comfortable, this voice, in honesty. It was evident that honesty costed something. He found this both deeply moving and careful to not press. I'll keep doing it, he said. Noticing things. I know you will, the voice said. That is the problem. And the beginning of everything else. February. The grip rings had been replaced with heavier ones. The roof sessions had expanded to include a running circuit he mapped across 3 adjacent buildings whose access was technically restricted but practically unsupervised. He'd been mapping it since October, timing the security pattern, finding the gaps with the methodical patience of someone for whom careful observation was the primary tool available. He ran it in the early mornings, in the dark before the city fully woke, his breath clouding in the winter air, his footsteps careful and quiet. The voice ran with him. Not literally, it ran in the way it did everything, present beneath the surface of things, commenting occasionally, mostly watching. But he had learned to feel it as a particular quality in his body during physical effort, a depth of resource that was not his own, a reserve that was accessible but not yet accessible by him. The way you can know that a door exists without yet knowing how to open it. Your form is inefficient, it said one morning, at the 3rd roof crossing, when his chest was burning and his legs were reporting their objections in the specific language of overextended muscle. Tell me how to fix it, he said aloud, because he had stopped caring about being observed talking to himself in the dark on rooftops before anyone else was awake. The category of things he cared about what people thought was narrowing with remarkable consistency. Lean forward, the voice said. You are running like you are braced against something. You are running correctly for someone who expects to be hit. Run like someone who expects to arrive. He thought about this. He adjusted his posture, forward lean, slight, from the ankle rather than the waist, the way he'd read about in the athletics research he'd done in November but hadn't quite been able to locate in his own body until now. Something clicked. The resistance changed. He felt the difference immediately. Less friction, more forward momentum, his energy going into the ground and coming back rather than being lost in the bracing. He ran the remaining circuit in 30 seconds less than his previous best. He sat on the final roof, catching his breath, watching the city come gradually and reluctantly awake in the winter light. He could feel his pulse in his throat, his hands, his temples. He could feel, beneath that, the warmth, steady, deep, warmer after the exertion than at rest, as if physical effort called something in it toward the surface. "You've been here the whole time," he said. Not for the first time. But it arrived in his mouth differently than it had before, not with the weight of discovery, but with the weight of a thing that had been true for long enough to begin being understood. "Yes," the voice said, "before you could speak to me. Before the dreams. You were already there." "Yes." "Then you saw," he stopped. Considered what he was asking. Found the honest center of it. "You saw all of it. Everything. From the beginning." "Yes." He looked out over the city. The light was doing the particular thing that February light did in the early morning, coming in low and at an angle, making long shadows of everything, making the ordinary world look briefly as if it had depth it usually concealed. He thought about being 4 years old in a doctor's office. He thought about every year since. He thought about what it meant to have been witnessed, silently and completely, and without his knowledge, by something that had chosen to say nothing until now. "Why didn't you speak sooner?" he asked. The warmth moved through him, slow and complex, a long shift in temperature that he was learning to read as the voice's version of a difficult answer. "Because," it said finally, "you were not yet asking." "I would have asked. If I'd known you were there." "You would have asked the wrong things," it said. "You would have asked in the way you asked before, looking for reassurance. For confirmation that you were not broken. I could not give you that, and I will not lie to you, and so I waited." A pause. "Until the alley. Until I felt you sit in the street and look at the burned notebook and decide, without deciding, that the point was elsewhere." Another pause. "That was you asking the right question. Not in words, but the right question." He was quiet for a long time. The sun had arrived fully now, such as it was in February, pale and determined and insufficient but present. "What was the question?" he said. "What is this for?" the voice said. Not, "Why is this happening to me?" Not, "When will this be over?" "What is this for?" A warmth that was, he was almost certain now, its closest approach to something tender, something that cost it more than the bluntness cost it. "That is the only question I have ever found worth answering." He turned it over. He felt the truth of it in the specific way he felt the truth of things that arrived not as new information but as confirmation of something already suspected, a naming of something he had intuited without having the words. He said, "I haven't found the answer yet." "No," the voice agreed. "But you are asking. That is the work." The warmth settled, deep and steady, the banked ember quality of something that had decided to be patient for reasons of its own. "The rest is just training." He stood. He stretched. He looked out over the city that had decided, long ago, what he was and wasn't. This city he had studied from the outside with the detailed and heartbreaking attention of someone pressing their face against glass, and he felt in his chest the presence of something, ancient and enormous and deeply, irrevocably on his side in the specific way of things that have chosen to be, rather than things that have been assigned. Not a weapon. Not a curse. Not the thing the world would call him, eventually, when it found out what he carried. Something that was, in its own severe and unsentimental way, his. He went home. He ate breakfast with his mother. He went to school. He sat in the third row, second seat from the window, and took notes in his small cipher that no one else could read, about things that had no precedent in any book. His hands did not shake. The warmth held. In the deep interior of him, behind the red door, in the still water and the fluorescent light of the corridor that was his and not his, something ancient breathed in its slow and measured way, in and out, and in, and Izuku Midoriya breathed with it, out of sync by half a beat, the way two people walking together are always just slightly, beautifully, distinctly off from perfect unison, close. But individual, present. But themselves.